The sensor alarm did not scream. It made a soft click, the kind the Resolute system used when it found something it could not name. That was the most unsettling kind. Dr. Osei Amper was in the lower archive room when Lieutenant Priya Nair's voice came over the ship intercom, calm but clipped. "Doctor, you may want to come up. Slowly, do not run, but come now." Osei had worked with Priya for 6 years. She did not say things like that unless they mattered. He walked up 2 decks and stepped onto the bridge. Commander Rena Solberg was standing at the forward display, arms folded, jaw tight. On the screen was a thermal shape, large, moving slowly through the drift, that long, dark stretch of nothing between 2 mapped star systems, a place ships crossed quickly and did not linger in. The shape was alive. "Size?" Rena asked, though the number was already on screen. 61 meters, said the navigation officer, Dent, wing folded. It is not using propulsion, just drifting. Osei moved beside Rena. "Is it injured?" "Unknown, vitals read stable, but it has been drifting for at least 4 hours based on trajectory." Priya turned from her panel. "It is Dravath, a juvenile, a hatchling by their scale, though at 60 meters that word feels wrong." The Dravath, Osei's breath slowed. He had read about them all his life, the way people read about things they never expect to actually see, ancient, starfaring before humans had finished fighting over water. They did not speak to humanity. That was not a rumor or a slight, it was simply the shape of things. They passed through a chord space like weather, noted, respected, left alone. And one had drifted, exhausted, into the Resolute's path. "Bring us alongside," Rena said. "Slow, Priya, open a tonal channel. Whatever you know of Dravath frequency, use it." "I know fragments, ceremonial tones mostly. It is like knowing 3 words of a language, and hopping the person needs exactly those 3 words." "Try anyway." What followed was 20 minutes of careful work. Priya sent low tonal pulses, greeting patterns from old Accord contact records. The juvenile responded in bursts that made the audio panel spike oddly, not aggression, something more like an answer spoken in a dialect Priya did not quite know. The juvenile turned in space and looked at the ship. Its scales were a deep, dusty gold, shot through with threads of violet that caught the faint starlight. Its eyes, both of them visible as it turned, were the color of old amber. It was folded in on itself, forelimbs drawn close to its chest, holding something. "It is holding an object," Dent said. "I can see that," said Rena. "Commander," Priya's voice was careful, "it is extending its forelimbs toward us. It is offering the object." The docking bay took 20 careful minutes to prepare. Rena did not rush it. She ran through every safety protocol herself, not because she distrusted her crew, but because she wanted to think. A Dravath juvenile, alone, in the drift, wanting to hand them something. Every part of that sentence was strange. The juvenile entered the bay slowly, folding itself down to fit. It was still enormous. Ceiling panels groaned softly. It settled on the deck with a patience that felt deliberate, as if it understood it needed to be less frightening and was trying. Rena walked in first, then Priya, Osei behind her. The object was in the juvenile's forelimbs. It looked like a box, roughly the size of a human torso, casing tarnished to near black, one corner badly cracked. But a crest was still visible on its face, pressed into the metal, worn but legible. Osei stopped walking. He knew that crest. He had held a replica of it in a museum on Callisto Station when he was 9 years old. A guide had told him what it meant, the Human Exploratory Corps, Pre-FTL Division. He had asked what the device was, and the guide had said, a wayfinder, the first ones ever built, only 12 were ever made. The last known wayfinder mark, I had been aboard the ISV Endurance. The ISV Endurance had vanished 340 years ago with 12 crew. No wreckage, no signal, gone. Osei's voice came out smaller than he intended. "That is the compass." Rena looked at him. "That is the compass from the Endurance," he said. "That is real, that is the actual." He stopped, started again. "That is not a replica. I would know the surface oxidation pattern anywhere. I have studied it for 20 years. Rena turned back to the dragon. The juvenile held the object out further, both forelimbs extended, the way a child holds something out when they have carried it a long way and want someone to take it now, please, carefully. Priya made a soft tonal sound, the Dravath word for careful or close enough to it. The juvenile responded, not in tones, in slow, broken, achingly careful galactic common. I found it, it said. I kept it safe. I looked for the right ones. A pause. The amber eyes moved from Priya to Osai to Rena. You are the right ones, yes. Rena stepped forward and took the compass with both hands. It was heavier than she expected. Her ancestor's name was engraved on the inner panel. She did not look at it yet. She could feel it under her thumb without looking. Yes, she said, we are the right ones. The juvenile let out a long breath that fogged the cold air of the bay, and for just a moment it looked, despite its size and its golden scales and its ancient inhuman eyes, very much like something that had been carrying a weight for a very long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. Word traveled faster than the Resolute could move. By the time Rena filed her contact report, honest, factual, stripped of anything that could be misread as an incident, the Galactic Accord had already been briefed by 3 other sources. She did not know who the other sources were, and she had stopped being surprised by that years ago. The summons came 8 hours later, not a request, a summons. Admiral Tomas Varda's face appeared on the main communication screen with the particular expression he wore when something had gone sideways in a way that made his life harder. He was a broad man, grey at the temples, careful with words the same way a person is careful with a door that might be unlocked or might not be. Commander Solberg, I am looking at a contact report that says you have a Dravath juvenile aboard your vessel. That is correct. Voluntarily. She came to us, sir. She brought something. Yes, I have seen the preliminary item description. He paused. The Accord wants a full account. There will be a formal session in 36 hours. You will attend via live link. The guest will remain aboard your ship until further notice. He said guest the way people say the word when they mean something else. Understood, Rena said. She ended the link and stood for a moment in the quiet of the communications bay. Then she went to find Osai. He was in the archive room with the compass on the examination table, surrounded by a ring of scanning equipment. He had not slept. She could tell because he was still wearing the same clothes and his eyes had the bright, fixed look of someone running entirely on focus and coffee. Internal crystal array is fractured, he said without turning. 3 of the 7 quantum anchors are completely dead, but the memory core, the physical log capsule in the base, is intact. Shielded ceramic casing. It protected the data. Can you read it? Given time, yes. The format is very old. I need to write a translation layer. He finally turned. Rena, her name is on the navigation plate inside the casing. Your ancestor, Lieutenant Dissas Solberg. The plate lists crew assignments. She was the ship's primary navigator. Rena had already known, from the moment she felt the engraving under her thumb in the docking bay. She had known and had set it aside the way she had learned to set things aside, firmly, in a place where she could find them later when there was room. Work on the logs, she said. I want to know what they recorded. The Dravath diplomat arrived the next morning. Elder Core was enormous even by Dravath standards. Her scales were a pale, burnished copper, her eyes deep green. She communicated through a translation relay because she did not speak Galactic Common and had no interest in learning it. She had been appointed, the relay said, by the Dravath Elder Council to address the situation. The situation, it turned out, meant Sova. That was the juvenile's name. Sova. Priya had learned it by the second day through careful, patient tonal exchange, piece by piece. Elder Core's message was not complicated. Sova had broken protocol. The Dravath did not engage with humans. This was not cruelty. It was an ancient rule with reasons behind it, reasons the Elder Council did not intend to discuss. Sova was to be returned to Dravath care immediately. Sova. When Priya translated this, clicked her jaw shut and did not move. Rena requested a direct channel to Kor's diplomatic vessel. She got it after 20 minutes of waiting that felt deliberate. With respect, Rena said, your hatchling carried a 340-year-old human artifact across the drift and hand-delivered it to us. She says she has more to explain. I am asking for the time to hear her. The translator relay carried Kor's response flat and without tone. The rule exists for reasons your species is not equipped to understand. Then explain them to me. Silence. Elder Kor, Rena said, 12 humans are still out there in the drift. 12 people whose families never got an answer. Your hatchling may have that answer. If you call her back before she gives it to us, I will file an accord inquiry into what the Dravath have known about the Endurance site and when they knew it. A pause. I would prefer not to. I would prefer to talk, but I need time. Another long silence, then 3 days. The link closed. In the cargo bay, Sova had begun doing something they did not understand at first. She lowered her head and began to trace marks on the deck with one claw. Slowly, carefully, the way someone writes in a language they are afraid of smudging. Priya came to watch. After a long time, she said quietly, it is a star map. Osei stood beside her, coffee going cold in his hand. The marks were precise, not random scratching but deliberate arcs, careful angles. A path through space, point to point to point. Where does it end? He asked. Priya studied it for a while. Then she pointed to a position near the center of the map, a single long mark, different from the others, heavier, pressed deeper into the deck. There, she said, that is the drift. That is where she came from. Osei looked at the point she was indicating. He thought about the endurance. He thought about 340 years of silence. He thought about 12 names on a crew manifest that had never been crossed off, only listed under missing. She knows where it is, he said. Yes, said Priya. They both looked at Sova, who had finished the map and was now sitting very still at the center of it, amber eyes watching them, waiting to see if they understood. They did. It took 4 days to build the vocabulary. Not 4 days of sitting and talking, 4 days of Priya carrying a small audio recorder into the cargo bay every few hours, working through fragments of Dravath tonal patterns she had learned from Accord archives, cross-referencing them with the sounds Sova made when she seemed to agree or disagree. It was slow, painstaking work, and Priya described it to Osei one evening as trying to assemble a machine from parts that came from 3 different machines, none of which had instructions. But Sova was patient, more patient than Priya expected. The hatchling seemed to understand that language was the only door between them, and she sat for hours making small sounds and watching Priya's face for recognition, adjusting, trying again. By the 4th day, they had something, not fluency, a bridge narrow, sometimes shaky, but it held weight. Sova began to talk. She had been living in the drift for 31 years. This was not unusual for a young Dravath, she explained through Priya's careful translation. Young ones of her kind were often sent into deep space alone for a period of years. It was how they grew. The elders gave them a direction and let them go. No maps, no contact. The idea was to learn the shape of things by being inside them. Sova had gone deeper than most, past the marked migration paths, past the edges of Accord survey territory, into the long dark stretches where there was nothing on any chart. She found the Endurance on her 9th year in the drift. She did not know what it was at first. She had seen human vessels before at a distance. Their shapes were known to the Dravath, but this one was old, wrong proportions for anything in current use. She circled it for several days before coming close. The ship was intact. No breach, no explosion damage. It had simply drifted until its power ran out, decades before Sova was born, and then continued drifting in the cold and the silence. She entered through a cargo hatch that was manually unlockable from the outside. Priya translated all of this to Rena and Osei in the corridor outside the cargo bay, speaking quietly, frequently pausing to replay the recording and recheck a tone or a word. Rena listened without interrupting. Osai wrote everything down in longhand, the way he always did when something mattered. Inside, Sova had found the crew. All 12 were accounted for. Most were in their bunks or at their stations. They had not panicked, or if they had, the panic was long finished before the end. The ship's internal records, which she could not read but had eventually learned were called logs, showed signs of having been maintained until very close to the last possible moment. Systems had been shut down in order, conserving power, conserving air, doing the math the way people do when they know the math is not going to come out in their favor, and they do it anyway because it is better than not knowing. The navigator had stayed at her post. When Priya relayed this part, she glanced at Rena. Rena was looking at the floor. Her face was very still. Osai said softly, "Please keep going." Sova had stayed inside the Endurance for a long time. Years, across multiple visits, she could not read the human language at first. She taught herself slowly from context, labels on panels, repeated words in logs she learned to open by studying the button sequences. Dravath did not have the concept of written language in their culture. Everything important was spoken and remembered. Written words were a strange idea to her. That someone would take the time to make marks on a surface so that a stranger, years later, in a cold, dead ship, could know what they had thought. This seemed to her like a kind of bravery she did not have a word for. She kept going back. She learned enough to read the basic logs. She learned the crew's names. She learned what they had tried. The compass, the wayfinder, had been on the navigator's panel. It was broken. The spatial compression wave that had pushed the Endurance off course had fractured its crystal array. But the navigator had kept it on her panel anyway. Sova thought about this for a long time before she decided. The navigator had kept it there because it was hers and because keeping things mattered even when they were broken. Sova took it when she finally decided to leave and find the right people. She took nothing else. "Why the compass specifically?" Osai asked when Priya reached that part. Priya put the question to Sova. There was a long exchange of sounds. Priya's face went through several expressions. "She says," Priya said, "that the compass was the navigator's, that the navigator was the one who stayed at her post, and that you," she glanced at Rena, "are the same kind. You stand where you are supposed to stand." She says she understood that the moment you walked into the docking bay. Rena said nothing for a long moment. Then she asked Osei, "How far along are you on the log extraction?" "Close," he said. "Another day, maybe less." "Keep working," she said. She walked toward the cargo bay door, paused with her hand on the frame, and looked in at Sova. The vast golden creature folded quietly in the low light, watching her back. "Tell her," Rena said to Priya, "that I want to hear everything, all of it, whatever those logs say." Priya translated. Sova made a sound that did not need much translation, low, slow, relieved. She had been carrying this for 31 years. She was ready to give it to someone who would hold it right. The accord session opened with 14 faces on the screen, and the particular silence of a room where everyone had already decided something and was waiting to announce it. Rena recognized the shape of it. She had sat in enough political rooms to know what a prearranged outcome looked like from the outside. Admiral Varda opened the session. He listed the facts cleanly: a Dravath juvenile aboard a human vessel, contact made without prior accord sanction, a recovered artifact of unclear legal ownership. He was careful not to say anything wrong, which also meant he said nothing that mattered. Elder Kor's translation relay joined partway through. The Elder did not wait for an opening. Her first statement came through the relay flat and certain. The drift territory surrounding the suspected wreck site was within Dravath migratory passage space. Any human expedition to that location required Dravath approval. Approval would not be granted. 3 Accord representatives from non-human member states nodded. They had spoken to Kor before this session. Rena could tell. The second Dravath position was simpler. Sova was to be returned immediately, the contact recorded as an anomaly, and no further discussion pursued. Rena waited until Varda gave her the floor. With respect to Elder Core, she said, I would like to ask a direct question. The ISV Endurance vanished 340 years ago. Sova found that Rec 9 years into her time in the drift, which means she is roughly 22 years old. The Dravath have migratory passages through that region. How many of your kind have passed through the drift in the last 340 years? Core's relay was quiet for a moment. That is not relevant. I think it is very relevant, Rena said, because if your people have been passing through that space for 3 centuries and the Endurance was visible enough for a young hatchling alone to find it by accident, then at some point someone older and more experienced also found it, and said nothing. Another silence. The rule, Core began. I know the rule, Rena said. The Dravath do not engage with humanity. I am not asking you to explain the rule. I am asking whether someone knew where our people were and chose not to tell us. The Accord chamber went very quiet. Varda was looking at her with an expression that said he both admired and feared her in equal measure. Core said, the reasons for the rule are not for this session. Then let me tell you what will happen next, Rena said. We have a recovered artifact from the Endurance. We have a hatchling who spent years inside that ship and has given us the location. We have the beginning of a full log extraction from the ship's memory core. I am going to file a formal recovery request with the Accord for access to the wreck site, citing humanitarian grounds, 12 missing persons, never recovered. And I am going to request a full Accord inquiry into what the Dravath have known about that site, and for how long. She said it without raising her voice. She was not angry, she was precise. You cannot simply, one of the Accord representatives began. I can file the request, Rena said. The Accord will decide what to do with it. That is how this works. She folded her hands. Or Elder Core can tell me why the rule exists. Give me a reason that makes sense. Give me something to take back to the families of 12 missing crew members. Give me that, and I will listen. Core's relay was silent for a long time. Then, from inside the cargo bay, which was 2 decks below and should have been out of range of the session's audio pickup, came a sound. Priya later said she must have forgotten to close the relay channel to the bay. Rena later said she did not believe that for a single moment. Sova spoke. Not in broken galactic common, not in the tonal fragments she used with Priya. She spoke in Old Dravath, the formal register, the one used for testimony before elders. The translation relay caught it and rendered it into the session channel. Her voice was low and steady. I have visited the humans' dead ship many times, she said. I have read what they wrote. I have learned their words so I could tell this correctly. I am going to say what I found. Core made a sharp sound. The relay did not translate it. Sova continued. The humans in that ship knew they were going to die. The air was running out. The power was nearly gone, and they kept their records. They organized their systems. They talked to each other. The last entries in their logs are calm. They said what mattered to them. Then they went to the places they wanted to be when it ended, and they stayed there. A pause. I have lived 40 years. I have flown alone in the dark for 31 of them. I have never seen anything like it. The session chamber was completely still. Our histories say humans are dangerous in the drift, Sova said. I read this warning before I left. The elders say to stay away because humans will change things. They spread, they build, they do not stop. Another pause. I think the warning is not about danger from them. I think an elder long ago saw what I saw, humans facing the end and choosing not to stop working, and felt something she did not have a word for. I think the warning is about that feeling. I think it is about what we would owe them if we kept watching and stayed quiet. She stopped. The relay carried nothing for a long time. Core did not speak. Varda looked at Rena. Rena looked at the screen, at the 14 faces, at the careful political silence breaking slowly apart like old ice. She waited. She was good at waiting. Humans were when they needed to be. Someone would move first. Someone always did. The Accord granted the recovery mission 11 days after the session. It was not a generous grant. The conditions were specific. 1 vessel, limited crew, no extraction of physical remains without additional clearance, full documentation shared with the Accord archive, no public statement until the Dravath Elder Council had reviewed the recovery report, and a time limit, 8 days at the site, then back. Rena signed every condition without complaint. Varda had expected negotiation. She gave him none. She did not want to spend time talking about what she was allowed to do. She wanted to go. Sova led them. There was no other option. The star map she had drawn on the cargo bay floor was accurate, Osai confirmed, but it was a Dravath orientation system, spatial memory, encoded as feeling as much as position, not directly translatable into the Resolute's navigation format. Sova had to be in the navigation bay, feeling the direction, and Priya had to translate her corrections in real time. It worked, badly at first, then better. They crossed into the deep drift on the third day. Sensors showed nothing for hours. Then Sova made a sound low, almost below hearing, and Priya said, "She says it is close. Slow down." The Endurance appeared on visual first, before sensors fully caught it. It came out of the dark gradually, the way a shape emerges when your eyes adjust. A long hull, older than anything currently in service. Its running lights were dark. Its communications antenna was still deployed, pointing at nothing. The HEC crest on its side had faded to a pale ghost of itself, but it was there. No one on the bridge spoke for a moment. "There she is," Osai said quietly. He said it to the screen, not to anyone in particular. Rena ordered the Resolute positioned alongside and began the boarding procedures herself. The team was small by design. Rena, Osai, Priya, and Sova, who fit through the cargo hatch she had used many times before. 2 engineers stayed at the hatch as the exterior team. Everyone else remained on the Resolute. The inside of the Endurance was cold. Not dangerously cold, but the kind of cold that comes from centuries of heat slowly bleeding out into nothing. Their breath fogged. The lights in their suits were the first light the corridors had seen in a very long time. Sova moved through it without hesitation, leading them with the ease of someone who had memorized every corner. She moved carefully around objects, gave the crew quarters a wide berth, and did not touch anything that had been left where it was placed. That was the first thing Rena noticed. She had been inside this ship for years, multiple visits, and she had moved nothing, not a single object out of its place. She had taken the compass, and only the compass, and even that she had clearly agonized over. The records room came first. Osai connected to the ship's archive with a portable reader and began the full extraction, hands steady, working without rushing. The crew quarters came next. Rena checked each one. 10 crew had chosen their bunks, neat, organized, at rest, their personal effects arranged. A few handwritten notes, which Osai photographed and catalogued without reading aloud. The navigation bay was last. The navigator's post was exactly as Sova had described. The chair was occupied, the panel was dark, and on the ledge above the panel, where a navigator might rest something while working, the impression in the dust showed the exact shape of where the compass had sat for 340 years. Rena stood there for a long time. She did not cry. She had done that privately 2 days into the drift crossing, in her quarters with the door locked. She had given herself an hour, and then she had been done with it. Now she stood in the navigator's bay and looked at the dust impression and thought about what it meant to come to the end of everything and still stay at your post. She thought she understood. She thought her ancestor would have understood her too. Osai finished the full documentation pass in 6 hours. Every crew member recorded, every personal item logged, the ship's full external and internal condition mapped. He worked with careful, reverent speed. There was no contradiction in that, she had learned with Osai. Before they left, Rena took the compass from her suit's carry case. She had brought it from the Resolute specifically for this. She set it back on the ledge above the navigator's panel in the impression it had left in the dust. Priya watched her do it. "You are not keeping it." "It belongs here," Rena said. "We could put it in a museum. People would want to see it." "People can see the logs. They can read what she wrote." Rena looked at the compass, sitting exactly where it had always sat. "This one goes home." In the corridor behind them, Sova made a sound. Priya turned to translate, then stopped. She looked at Sova for a moment. She understood that, Priya said, she did not need me to translate. They moved back through the ship toward the hatch. At the cargo entrance, Rena stopped and turned back once, just once, to look down the dark corridor. 340 years was a long silence to break, but it had been broken now, cleanly, with names and records and the careful work of people who had decided that how you spent your last hours mattered as much as anything else. She turned back to the hatch and climbed through. Sova was last to exit. She paused at the hatch for a moment, one forelimb resting lightly on the Endurance's hull, and then pulled herself through and let the hatch close behind her. She did not look back. She had already said whatever a Dravath says to a place when they are finished visiting it. The Resolute pulled away slowly. Behind them, the Endurance drifted on, not lost anymore, just still. The Accord reviewed the recovery report for 9 days. Rena spent those 9 days on the Resolute doing the work of filling out forms, which was the least glamorous part of anything and also the most necessary. Osai was compiling the Endurance archive. Priya was cleaning up her transcription of Sova's full account and adding translator's notes, careful notations about which parts of the Dravath original had no clean equivalent in Galactic Common and why she had chosen the words she had. Sova stayed in the cargo bay. She had declined the offer of space on another vessel twice now. She did not explain in detail. Priya thought it was because she had nowhere specific to return to and that the Resolute, in its small human way, had begun to feel like somewhere. The Elder Council's response came not through Core, but directly from the Council itself, which Vada told Rena was almost without precedent. It was formal, structured in the oldest Dravath diplomatic register. Priya translated it carefully. It did not use the word apology. Dravath had no word for apology. What they had instead was a term closer to acknowledgement of debt, the formal recognition that something was owed and would not be dismissed. The Council offered it to humanity, specifically to the families of the Endurance crew, specifically by name. Vada, in the debrief call, was already talking about what this could mean for border access agreements in the Drift Corridor, for trade route expansion, for diplomatic leverage with 3 other species who watched Dravath behavior closely. Rena let him talk for a while, then she said, "Admiral, the families first. The Endurance crew has names, 12 of them. Those families here first, privately, before any of this becomes policy. That is what I want." "Commander, the political window." "The families first," she said, "or I hold the full record and release it publicly before any Accord statement goes out." She would not actually do that. She thought he probably knew she would not do that, but he also knew she might, and that was enough. The families heard first. Rena was not in the room for any of those conversations. They were handled by the Accord's official notification teams, with Osai providing the specific details about the ship and the crew's final hours. He told Rena afterward that every family had asked the same first question, phrased in different ways. Did they know, and were they afraid? The answer that the crew had worked until the last possible moment, that they had said what mattered, that they had chosen their places and stayed in them, was not a comfortable answer. But it was a true one, and Osai said that for most of the families, true mattered more than comfortable. He said this like he had expected it and was glad to have been right. Core made one more contact with the Resolute 3 days before her diplomatic ship departed. She asked to speak with Sova. Priya set up the channel and then left the cargo bay to give them privacy. She told Rena afterward that she had only caught fragments of it on her way out, old Dravath, very formal, the kind of language elders used when they were saying something they had rehearsed. Core's voice had been doing something that Priya had only heard Dravath voices do twice before. It was careful in a way that meant the speaker was keeping it controlled on purpose. Sova did not share what was said. Rena did not ask. What Rena learned later, through Accord channels officially released, was that the elder who had first written the Dravath warning about the drift had encountered the Endurance site 3 centuries ago, not the Endurance itself. Earlier wreckage, earlier humans. The warning she wrote was not about military threat or territorial concern. It was about what she had seen, humans who had broken apart and still left behind, in their wreckage, evidence of every effort they had made. Evidence of everything they had tried. She had written, "Do not look too closely. You will feel what you owe them, and we are not ready for that weight." The warning had been passed down as caution. It had calcified into rule. Sova had broken the rule because she had looked too closely and decided the weight was worth carrying. In the final days, before the Resolute resumed its survey route, Sova asked Rena if she could stay on board. Not permanently, for one more voyage, as a non-crew observer. She used the galactic common term that meant something close to a student of the journey, though Priya noted the Dravath original was a word used for a young one who follows a trusted elder to learn something they cannot learn alone. Rena said yes, without consulting anyone. On the night before they broke from station, Rena went to the cargo bay. Sova was awake. She slept rarely and briefly, which Priya said was normal for young Dravath. The bay was dark except for the running lights along the wall. Sova was a large, quiet shape in the low light. Osai was in the corner with his tablet, reading from the endurance logs, the way he had been every night since they recovered them. Rena sat on a crate. After a while, Sova said, "Your people are very small." "We are," Rena agreed. "And very loud." "Also true." A long pause. The ship hummed. Somewhere above them, Dent was running a pre-departure check and calling out numbers in the steady rhythm that meant everything was in order. "And very certain," Sova said, "of things that are not certain." Rena looked at her. "You think that is a flaw?" Sova was quiet for a moment. "I thought so," she said, "before." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Os looked up briefly from his tablet and then back down, the small smile on his face, something he was trying not to show. Outside, the stars were where they always were, patient, indifferent, enormous beyond counting. The Resolute moved toward them anyway. That was the thing about humans, they always did.